You think that you will stop walking and help that disgusting, stinking drunk piece of trash, huh? The ways even we as ordinary people idolize money is comparable to the VIPs. Even in the case of spending $5 on a donation, our very mindsets, the posture of our hearts can still birth darkness. The entire concept of when money isn't freedom can be summed up in one statement: your life is for my benefit. Squid Game Season 1 presented a series of games, the Squid Games, in which the wealthy VIP creators of the games use and discard the lives of the players for their own self interests. They created their own quote unquote economy based on the idea of equal exchange. It's the idea that the players have entered into a sort of marketplace, which, unlike in the real world, is supposed to be inherently fair. But where there's an economy, there's economic activity. And where there's a marketplace, there are goods being exchanged for value. What is sinister about the Squid Games is that the goods presented in the Squid Game marketplace are the lives of the players, and the value they are being exchanged for is cold, hard cash. The phrase I mentioned earlier, quote, your life is for my benefit, end quote, is the agreement that every player, masked guard, the frontman, and the VIP involved inherently agrees with in order to enter the Squid Games arena in the first place. All of their lives exist for each other's benefit. In Squid Game, money isn't freedom because it's so intensely idolized that each of the characters are willing to kill and die to obtain it. It brings into question the value of money and the emphasis we as humans place on it. Hi, I know that Squid Game Season 2 is already out, but there's something I feel has been kind of missing in the collective reflection on what Squid Game Season 1 has to say about human nature's relationship with money. So, here are some of my thoughts and, dare I say, analyses of Squid Game Season 1. Please also look forward to even more musings on Season 2 in the future. So here we go. I'm your host, Runner, and you're listening to the Freedom Together podcast, because freedom is best experienced together. This is episode 1, Squid Game, When Money Isn't Freedom, part 1. The money for the Squid Game marketplace is entirely provided by the VIPs, and they determine the terms by which said money is exchanged for. By choosing gambling as their terms of trade, they actually reveal their core ideals, that for them, money is a game. The philosophy of the VIPs in the games is this: if money is a game and life can only thrive through the obtention of money, then life too is a game. Their belief is that those who have the most money are those who are in control, not control just over class, status, and power, but over literal life and death. They place a barter of 45.6 billion won, or around 31.5 million US. But the opportunity cost is the very life of the players. The irony that the games presents is that the rich are just as hefty gamblers as the poor debtors. Both gamble for entertainment, both risk the opportunity to lose exorbitant amounts of cash, and both are addicted to the adrenaline rush linked to the possibility of winning. The difference is that the rich gamble with money they have, including the ability to remake high earnings through their businesses, whereas the poor debtors gamble with money they do not have. The rich, in the pervasive boredom of their own lives, decided to invest their money in their deepest philosophy yet, that since for them, life is a game, they are willing to risk the heart and fuel of their philosophy, money, for the chance to experience what they consider deep entertainment. 45.6 billion won is payment for the viewing of the extravagant deaths of 454 lives. The rich conceive that because the poor have amassed massive debts that they're unable to pay off, that to them, the poor debtors' lives therefore have negative value. The Squid Games represent a created realm to bring this philosophy to life. In the games, the rich are in total control, and the value of a single life literally has a price tag, 100 million won. In Squid Game Season 1, money isn't freedom because every action is considered a transaction, and every transaction comes at a cost. Every member of the Squid Game economy is intertwined in a web of exploitation, and placing a price tag on something that is priceless, which is life, ironically cheapens the very existence of money as a currency of value in the first place. Because the premise of the Squid Game marketplace is that money can be exchanged for life. Given that the Squid Game economy operates on the idea of benefiting from the deaths of others, the player who wins it all is the one who most embodies this philosophy, whether or not it is against their will. It could be argued that the Squid Games are almost like a tryout for the winner's imminent new role at the top of the economic pyramid. Contrary to the values Gihun ultimately wants to uphold, the Squid Games in Season 1 represents his ascension to the top of the richest philosophy. He wins because he becomes the embodiment of what it takes to play by equating money with life. The lives of his friends, the other players, and even his mother were taken for his benefit. Whether he likes it or not, Gihun's win makes him the trophy bearer of this wicked philosophy. Gihun is now the VIP. One scene in particular highlights exactly how Gihun embodies this VIP identity. It's episode 9, the scene of Oil Lam's big reveal. Gihun visits the elderly man in what looks like an extremely large corporate-style floor that's completely empty, save for the hospital bed and equipment set up in the farmost corner of the space, next to the sprawling floor-to-ceiling windows. Gihun is enraged that the man is still alive. Yet, Oil Lam's focus is on a homeless man on the street on the verge of freezing to death. And then it happens. In one of the greatest moral twists of the series, both parties complicitly agree to bet on the value of the homeless man's life by betting to see whether or not someone passing by will save the man from freezing to death. Both characters use betting money to delay their responsibility for doing something for someone they know is in need. Furthermore, because money is now involved via Gihun and Ilnam's bet, there is now a risk that the man will die. Rather than Olam calling an attendant to get the man to a hospital, or Gihun leaving to help the man himself, they both place value in their bet over the very life of the man. It doesn't actually matter that Olam was wrong and someone did go to help the victim after all. It doesn't matter that Gihun's faith in humanity was restored. This ending scene of Squid Game Season 1 is deeply ironic because Gihun's intaking of the gambling philosophy is made complete when he waits to see how his bet will turn out rather than choosing to do something about it with his own two hands. The moment shows that after the games, Gihun hasn't actually learned anything critical against the richest philosophy at all, and that the philosophy of equating money with life has truly been birthed within him. This contrasts the free actions of the man passing by, who required no exchange to ensure the freezing man was taken care of. Ultimately, we know Gihun is capable of this behavior, as shown in the beginning of the series in episode 1 when he feeds a starving cat. But all the scene does is emphasize that, regardless of Gihun's moral stalemate after winning the games, he has not fully rejected the philosophy of the VIPs. Even outside of the games, Gihun is content to equate money with life. The chaos of Squid Game Season 1's criticism is shown in the protagonist's growth. At the beginning of the series, Gihun somewhat gave freely of himself, and yet, nearing the end of the series, even when he is no longer within the games, he too is content to bet on a life rather than do what he can outside of money to help. Instead, Gihun is now in the same place as the rich were in the games, overseeing from a fancy tower as two wealthy folks watch and bet upon the life of the poor. The camera angles emphasize this. In the games, the players were shown with a downward sloping angle from the perspectives of the VIPs. This is the same downward sloping angle that the drunken man is shown from the perspective of Ilnam and Gi-hun when they bet on his life. Gi-hun is now acting in his role as a VIP. There is a persistent foreshadowing of our protagonist, Song Gi-hun's rise to the top of the Squid Games. Gi-hun's gambling addiction is so intense that he gambles in 3 separate times in the very first day we're introduced to him. He bets twice at the horse racing gambling center. He bets several times at the claw machine when trying to get a gift for his daughter. And he bets several times when approached by the recruiter for the games by playing the game Takji. We kick the series off with Gi-hun hustling his overworked elderly mother for her hard-earned money. She gives him some money to spend on his daughter's birthday, but he asks her for more under the lie that he wants to make his daughter's birthday even more special. Even after taking money from his mother twice, he still steals her debit card to withdraw even more money from her bank account, all in a plot for his ultimate plans to gamble it all away, only for the possibility for larger winnings. The fact that the pin to his mother's account has been changed shows, quite disappointingly, that this isn't his first time stealing from her, nor is it his first time gambling, and that his mother is fed up with him enough to change the pin from his birthday to his daughter's. What is significant about this is that Gi-hun finds hope in this possibility for larger winnings. His addiction to gambling is an addiction to the opportunity he has to actually win. He's given up all hope on being able to get out of his debt through ordinary methods. And his actions show us that he thinks only a miracle of luck could actually get him out of his current situation, not working like an ordinary citizen. The irony of this is that his gambling addiction is funded by the labor of his ordinary citizen mother. Her life is for his benefit. This is all the more emphasized when Gi-hun's mother literally passes away while he left her to gamble in the Squid Games. There's a scene in episode 1, just after Gi-hun met and gambled with the Squid Games recruiter, where Cho Sang-hoo's mother says to Gi-hun, "You gambled again?" And Gi-hun responds, "Not this time." The scene is really interesting to me because it shows how Gi-hun can't recognize that risking his body for cash is still gambling. It shows how much of a frequent gambler Gi-hun is and the extent to which he was willing to place his body as collateral for gaining money. It's also a subtle foreshadowing of Gi-hun's mentality towards money versus wellness. Gambling is the ultimate symbol intersecting between money as a game and life as a game because you can both lose and win extreme amounts of money through the gambling pipeline. For the random gambler, life too is a game, just like the rich's philosophy. From the very beginning, Gi-hun specifically had more in common with the rich than he knows. The economy of the games shows how life is devalued when it is equated with money. The games themselves are the ultimate symbol of how money is equated with life because they are the embodiment of the VIP's philosophy. Players are recruited through the same exact method. They were tempted to bet money they didn't have for the chance to win more money. An example is when Gi-hun is being recruited, even though he doesn't have 100,000 won to stake on his bet. He still goes through with the gamble. When he and all the other Squid Game contestants discovered that they could use their body as collateral to win the money, the characters are each shown to take the bait, risking their health for the chance to win even once. Ironically, this literally proves the philosophy of the rich, since the poor debtors really do end up risking their bodies. None of the characters seem to consider it inappropriate to risk their bodies and their pain for the chance to obtain cash. The recruiter's initial game of Takji serves as a kind of entrance exam to the games to test 2 things. First, is a prospective player truly addicted to gambling? And second, are they willing to place their bodies on the line to win some cash? 93% of the players returned to the games even after realizing they were risking their lives. Ironically, the players too believe in the philosophy of the VIPs that their very lives are a worthy exchange for money. Within the games, every life lost is an increase in the total amount of money to be won. This is a literal gamification of life. We see this notably when Chang Dok-soo killed someone outside of the games, and his actions of murder are rewarded with more money being added to the pot. It doesn't matter how the contestants are killed, one death is equal to 100 million won. This gamification of life is continued even after death and outside of the arena, which is emphasized when we see that a group of the Red Staff have been selling the organs of dead contestants who lost their lives in the games. The deepest mystery of the origins of the games is in the rationale behind it. Why do the VIPs choose their philosophy? Why do they choose to equate money with life? In the final episode of season 1, when Lam points out the freezing man on the street below them, he says, quote, "You think that you will stop walking and help that disgusting, stinking drunk piece of trash, huh?" End quote. He's arguing that society isn't much different from him, that he isn't the only one who sees the man on the verge of death yet is refusing to help, that he isn't the only one, even in the larger context of society, who equates money with life. People who refused to help the homeless man did so because he had no money and therefore no value to society. When Olam tells Gihun that boredom is the reason for the game's senseless act of mass murder, the scene is made complete as we realize that Olam won't help the drunken man because he derives pleasure from watching him struggle to survive. The homeless man's life has no meaning to him, but watching him on the verge of death brings Olam joy. In reality, the VIPs devalue both life and money. For them, neither life nor money has any ability to bring them joy, so neither of them matter. The greatest irony of the VIPs' lives is that they obtained the greatest wealth the world has to offer. They rose to the top of what they consider is a game of life and found themselves lost. All their money led them to is a vapid and meaningless existence, so great that in order to feel even a tiny amount of pleasure in life, they decided to pay to watch other people die. They weaponized their money to make themselves feel that earning it was worth it in the first place. In reality, the ultimate origins of the games reside within the VIP's need to feel alive by viewing death. When Olam is revealed in the final scenes on the verge of death, there's no family by his side, no children or life partner, cooped up in the corner of a room, betting to see whether or not the drunken man below him will die. He even admits that he began the games to remind himself of simpler times, of times before he obtained his wealth in the first place. In this way, the rich are paying to experience the tender normalcies of everyday life. This is a powerful metaphor of the entirety of the games. At the top of the food chain is emptiness. The wealth the poor debtors were fighting to set them free instead produces a psychological prison. And so the VIPs uplift themselves with golden animal-shaped masks as symbols of their own self-importance. Using human bodies as props for their own comfort, they place themselves at the top of the food chain and avoid recognizing that the games are really just evidence of their own hopelessness. Squid Game Season 1 is a critique on the hold that money has over humanity. Within the economy of the games, it is impossible for money to set the characters free, because as long as money is being exchanged, life is being exchanged. A stalemate is produced because the players need to escape their debts by obtaining money, but any money obtained through the Squid Games is blood money gained from the loss of life. This is all the more emphasized when Gi-hun, during the very last game, offers to withdraw from the games to save Cho Sang-hoo's life. But Sang-hoo, knowing that Gi-hun would take care of his mother in his place, sacrifices his life for his mother's and Gi-hun's benefit. The stalemate is fulfilled because Gi-hun is an unwilling participant in the death of his friend. But Gi-hun's intentions do not matter. The system greatly outweighs his intentions, and regardless of his intentions, he is complicit within the system. Even after the game's end, Gi-hun's stalemate persists. If Gi-hun doesn't spend the money, he wastes away in poverty, and his financial problems remain. However, if he does spend the money, it is blood money, which further plays into the system. Just before the scene where Gi-hun fulfills his promise to Cho Sang-hoo's mother, we see Gi-hun dye his hair red. But if we actually look into the theme of red hair a step further, going back to the scene with Oil Lam, it appears as though the Good Samaritan character who helped the homeless man actually has red hair themselves. I think Gi-hun was inspired by the character's altruism, giving him hope needed to move forward. Gi-hun, after being stuck for a year without touching the money, is finally able to make a decision to spend it. Gi-hun's choice of red hair is a reference to the Matrix's red pill, blue pill choice, where the red pill represents knowledge of the truth, but the blue pill represents comfort in ignorance. After Gi-hun discovers the truth about Oil Lam, his hair symbolizes his choice of the red pill. Now he has full knowledge of the root of the games. With his newfound openness to the truth, Gi-hun charges in to do the right thing by finally fulfilling his promises to Sang-hoo and Kang Sep-yeok. However, the chaos of this scene is subtle. It appears that Gi-hun does the right thing when he leaves the money and Sep-yeok's younger brother with Sang-hoo's mother. However, as we've established, any money Gi-hun spends or gives away is now blood money. Even though we as the audience are rooting for the families of the main characters, it can't be ignored that these characters literally had to die for Gi-hun to obtain it. And even if Gi-hun spends the money only on the families of his friends, nothing is still done for the families of all the other players who died on the way for Gi-hun to obtain wealth. Is money really adequate payment for the loss of life? Even though Sang-hoo and Sep-yeok gave up their lives so their loved ones wouldn't have to suffer financially, ultimately, Gi-hun's actions are still trapped in the system of materialistic exchange, because it's as though he's giving the money in replacement for their loved ones' lives. Is that the greatest extent of humanity he has to offer them? Money? If so, this is no different from the philosophy of the games. This is where the final morality of the series starts to break down. What is season 1 of the series saying is the right thing to do? We're now brought to the end, to the final scene in episode 9, where Gi-hun is on his way to take a trip to the US to visit his daughter. Gi-hun appears as though he's finally in a good place to commit to her and to take care of her as a father. Yet, he withdraws from the gesture, further delaying his relationship with her. This scene is actually deeply symbolic. Gi-hun, in choosing to chase after the games, is chasing after the ultimate symbol of gambling and the richest philosophy once again. This is where I believe one of the greatest moral dilemmas in the series arrives, and its tension is so subtly emphasized through the contrast between Gi-hun's red hair and his blue suit. His red hair showcases his knowledge of the truth, but his blue suit shows that some part of him is still comfortable in ignorance. His actions all the more emphasize this tension. Choosing to go after the games instead of his daughter means that, once again, Gi-hun is choosing gambling over family, seemingly just like in the beginning with his mother. There is deep tension in his decisions once again, because it isn't clear what the quote-unquote right decision for him to take. If he ignores the games and goes to his daughter, he misses the chance to avenge the deaths of the 454 players, excluding Elnam. But going towards the games might mean that Gihun still hasn't learned something deeply critical. Gihun visiting his daughter isn't just about his financial ability to take care of her, it's about his commitment to her as a father. Money is only a pretense of hope. It isn't actually the root of the greatest qualities of humanity in showing one another love, compassion, gratitude, selflessness, unity. If Gihun had recognized this from the beginning, he would have taken better care of his elderly mother, for example, by giving her breaks and offering to help her at her shop more frequently. Or perhaps he wouldn't have depended so much on superficial gifts for his daughter when it's only his character traits she's concerned about. When we see him interact with her, all he does is promise her physical gifts, things he can't fulfill. And yet, when we see Gihun through her eyes, all she wants is for her father's actual character growth, for him to stop smoking, for him to not get into fights, for him to not shame himself by punching her stepfather. She cares for his growth as a human being, not mainly for what he can provide financially. Living more compassionately wouldn't have solved our protagonist's financial burdens, but at the very least, it would serve as a resistance against the rich's philosophy that there is no meaning to life beyond the gamble of money. Money only solves the immediate financial problems we face. It is no replacement for our humanity. As we revisit the tension between Gihun's red hair and his blue suit, we ask ourselves the question, which is the red pill decision and which is the blue pill decision? If Gihun is at a loss regardless of which direction he takes, what is the series saying is the right decision for Gihun to make? We can't exclusively say that red means good and blue means bad. After all, the recruiter who lured the poor into the games also represented red, which is the knowledge of the truth. I would argue that it's in this final scene that the brilliance of Squid Game comes out in full force, because this time, it isn't Gihun's actions that are the driving point of the scene, it's his motivations. It represents the moment that the richest philosophy of your life is for my benefit becomes subverted. It is in his motivations that he rejects their philosophy, this time going after gambling to preserve the lives of others instead. Ultimately, I don't think the tension between red and blue is about the specifics of his decision. It's about his journey in the midst of him finally now knowing the truth. I don't think the dichotomy is necessarily such that going to his daughter represents blue pill, whereas going to the games represents red pill, or vice versa. I think the blue-red tension is within him, and that, in fact, the fullness of Gihun's character evolution will come when his actions do not become defined by money, and where his humanity supersedes his spending. I think the ending is ambiguous on purpose to show us that Gihun is actually still at the beginning of his journey. Squid Games Season 1 is simply our witness of his origin story. Now, I want to tell a little story of my own. Realistic fiction. There is a homeless man begging on the street. Let's call him James. Car after car and pedestrian after pedestrian passes James by without giving him any attention. Along comes a young man walking on the same street. Let's call him Brad. Brad sees James, reaches into his wallet, and hands him a $5 bill. James thanks him deeply, and Brad goes on about his day. After finishing his errands, Brad is passing by James once more and notices a few empty cans of beer, which weren't there a few hours ago when he first passed by. The realization slowly hits him that James, instead of using the money to buy what most people would consider a sensible purchase of food or living supplies, instead he spent it on alcohol. Brad doesn't engage him, doesn't confront him, but internally, Brad is furious, seething, out of his mind, angry. How dare James spend his hard earned money to feed his own addiction? But Beyond his anger, Brad feels upset with himself, as though he was complicit in feeding the addiction of someone who just couldn't help it. He starts to blame himself and declares that the next time he wants to help, he will ask what the person needs and buy those items himself. This kind of story is one I've heard of pretty often. It's never the exact same story, but there's usually an element of giving money and there being a mismatch between how the giver hoped the funds would be used versus how they were actually used. The consensus tends to be similar, that when we give to people in need, we should try to give materials rather than money, because the person given to can use that money for whatever they want rather than whatever is best for them. This consensus is technically logical. After all, why should a person working hard to earn money donate the fruits of their labor to fuel someone's addiction, not their recovery? Charity is meant to be the concept which best represents ideas surrounding altruism and selflessness. It's the idea of giving of one's self without expectations of anything in return. The act of giving away the same heart and fuel, money, that the rich VIPs in Squid Game depend on to make themselves relevant in the first place. The platform of charitable giving is supposed to exist outside of the economic marketplace. It's supposed to exist outside of the transactional nature of society. That's why it's socially acceptable for legal nonprofits to, for example, have volunteers who work without pay, not be required to pay taxes, have missions that focus on alleviating suffering as opposed to focusing on earning a profit for private investors. Charity as a concept is supposed to represent a flow where money or labor is given, but nothing is expected in return. But in the story I told about Brad, even though he seems to be selflessly giving away money, his act of charity re enters the fiscal marketplace when Brad places terms onto his act of giving through his very mindset. Because Brad has expectations of how his money should be used, his actions have instead been made into a transaction. Instead of giving without expecting anything in return, Brad's expectations of the responsible use of his money places an unspoken burden on James. In reality, even if Brad witnessed James purchase something responsible like a blanket or canned food, this would make Brad feel better about his donation, but it still makes the interaction transactional. Making Brad feel good is the value he gets in return from the donation. I mentioned an idea earlier that because Brad worked hard to earn money, there is an expectation that his money should also work hard wherever it's spent. But this makes it seem like it isn't worthwhile to spend on a homeless man who isn't trying to recover, because money is worth as much as what it's spent on. It's like saying giving to a homeless addict who refuses treatment isn't worthwhile, but giving to an addict who is earnestly trying to recover is worthwhile because you, the donor, decided that it is. It's a need to control the outcome that the donation contributes to. This is seeking value, seeking return out of an act that is supposed to be totally unconditional. When we invest money into a company listed on the stock market, we have a stake in that company. That stake means we have a vested interest in the profitability of the company so that the initial investment we make can produce favorable returns for us. In Brad's case, him having a hope for favorable returns in James's life is the indication that Brad has really made an investment, not just a detached donation. His intentions towards James births a sense of responsibility for James's actions, that he now has a stake in the outcome of James's life. But why am I focusing on this at all? In Squid Game, we criticize the VIPs for exchanging life for money, but there's this perspective that their mindset is bizarre, unrealistic for the average person. In reality, The ways even we as ordinary people idolize money is comparable to the VIPs. By focusing on our hearts and intentions when humanity is supposedly at its most selfless, we can identify the ways money has a hold on us that parallels the wickedness of the VIPs. The hold money has on humanity isn't about the amount we have, but rather our relationship with our internal selves and the world around us. Squid Game represents the highest scale of harm proportional to the amount of money spent. But even in the case of spending $5 on a donation, our very mindsets, the posture of our hearts, can still birth darkness. How we spend money, especially when we are giving it away, delves deeply into the recesses of our identities and how we as individuals and as a society view money. Something important is hidden within our internal reactions when letting money go outside of the economic marketplace. Our reactions to how our money is spent can instantaneously transform a truly charitable act into a transactional act. I want to give a few other short examples of what I'm talking about. Again, realistic fiction. Cindy has a large social media following. She frequently makes big donations to a cause she is completely indifferent to, but posts about frequently on her social media pages, with a lot of sentimental language, lots of smiles in her pictures. She always makes sure to publicly announce how much she's giving. Cindy's value is gained because her donation is irrevocably seen in a positive light. Internally, it reveals her desire to be acknowledged by any means necessary, and within that is an insecurity that she is insignificant without the acknowledgement of others. Carl donates money and tells absolutely no one, but internally, he secretly resents anyone who chooses not to donate to the same causes as him. He won't readily admit this, but he thinks of himself as a better person because he does what others knowingly choose not to. Carl's value comes from feeling good about what he considers is doing the right thing. Internally, it reveals a superiority complex within him, beneath which is a fear that, without good deeds, he is inherently inferior to the average person. Mia is extremely passionate about a particular social cause. She's constantly volunteering and donating to support this cause, and she happens to share her efforts on social media to bring awareness to it, also sharing links for others to donate their money or their labor as well. Mia's value comes from feeling good about being able to support something she loves while influencing others to do the same. Internally, it reveals her desire to convince others about the validity of the cause she cares about, with the hopes that they may support it as well. Beneath that, it reveals within her a need to prove to herself that she is, quote unquote, a good person, since she's doing her best to help. It is a controlling sense of responsibility, the need to feel she is good, because she fears the possibility that she really isn't, and is terrified about what that means for her moral existence. The bizarre difference between the Squid Game VIPs and we in the real world is that the rich VIPs were upfront and honest about their twisted morality. They genuinely believe that one life is equal to 100 million won. But we in the real world, even in supposedly the greatest representations of our humanity via charitable acts, we are lying to ourselves and each other by pretending that there isn't some form of equal exchange taking place. We are pretending we are giving freely when, in reality, we often seek to receive value we believe is equal to the value of what is given away. There is something in our hearts that continues to be attached to money even when we are giving it away. We are pretending to be, quote unquote, good persons when we are really just receiving our money's worth. Even in our charity, our hearts are not charitable. The twisted morality of the VIPs who use money to supplement their inner selves can be very similar to the ways we in reality use money to supplement our inner selves. In as much as that sounds really dark, I actually think the VIP's philosophy of, quote, your life is for my benefit, end quote, can actually be easily subverted. And it's in the inverse of their philosophy. Quote, my life is for your benefit, end quote. I want to read something that, for me, best embodies this inverse concept of my life is for your benefit. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. This is a reading from the first book of Corinthians, chapter 13, verse 4 to verse 7, from the New International Version of the Bible. And I have another quote. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends. This excerpt comes from the book of John, chapter 15, verse 12 to verse 13, in the English Standard Version of the Bible. In this excerpt, the speaker is Jesus Christ. When we reverse the transactional habits we walk in on a daily basis, when we separate our actions from our transactions, when we prioritize serving each other with patience and kindness, I trust that something extraordinary will be birthed. Maybe there won't be any fireworks going off. There probably won't be any congratulations or acknowledgement from others at all. Most of all, it probably won't feel very good. Being patient and kind to someone or some situation that, in our minds, doesn't deserve it could end up feeling like you're being exploited. But I'm reminded of Jesus Christ's journey as he neared the end of his life, his heart filled with patience and kindness, as he forgave his murderers while they were murdering him. Yet, isn't an example like that the portrait of freedom from fear, insecurity, pride? Freedom from the shades of darkness of our inner selves. His sacrifice was the embodiment of my life is for your benefit when he died on the cross for the very persons who put him there. I want to wrap up with the acknowledgement of the ways a lot of the points I mentioned intersect with my own identity. Like one of the characters I mentioned earlier, Mia, I too am sharing my faith out of passion. And similarly to her, there is somewhat of a desire that you, the listener, will ponder the depths of the Christian faith. But it's the final part I mentioned about Mia where I personally experienced the most transformation. About Mia, I said, quote, Mia's value comes from feeling good about being able to support something she loves while influencing others to do the same. Internally, it reveals her desire to convince others about the validity of the cause she cares about, with the hopes that they may support it as well. Beneath that, it reveals within her a need to prove to herself that she is, quote unquote, a good person, since she is doing her best to help. It's a controlling sense of responsibility, the need to feel she is good because she fears the possibility that she really isn't, and is terrified about what that means for her moral existence. My faith in Jesus Christ forces me to accept that my personal deepest fear is true, that I am both capable of and actively produce unseen wickedness, even if I don't intend to, even when I actively strive against it, there is an inevitability to the ways that I, as an individual, produce darkness and the ways I contribute to the collective darkness humanity produces. Again, even when or if we don't intend to. Yet, my faith in the gospel of Jesus Christ has birthed shades of freedom in my own life. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, self control, goodness, faithfulness, against which there is no law. That's not to say that I'm always walking in these fruits of the Holy Spirit, but rather that having access to them at all, for me, is the evidence that a particular kind of freedom is attainable. So, God willing, I hope to continue to share my musings on the little and big ways I believe the gospel redeems darkness in everyday life. That's all for now. Thank you for listening. See you in part 2.